Hello, my name is Juanita Jimenez, and today I will be talking about three themes, which are theft, violence, and impunity. The United States has a lengthy history of taking over land that isn't theirs. Like you see this with the Native Americans and the U.S. territories, such as Puerto Rico and Hawaii. In this world, I noticed that land is power, so it makes a lot of sense that the United States, being as greedy as they are, wants to conquer more land without truly understanding the land of the people or just in general how to inhabit and manage the land. And because of this, the three themes I've decided, as mentioned before, are theft, violence, and impunity. So for theft, white Americans migrated to the West, which was originally Mexico, and I feel like a lot of people really don't know this. I know I didn't know this until sometime earlier this year, but the white Americans, they felt as though they were entitled to the land and pushed the rightful owners of the land off, which were the Mexicans. And in my opinion, I feel like this was one of the biggest crimes in U.S. history, and it repeats itself constantly. And it's mind-boggling to me how, like, everyone is just okay with this in the United States. Like, oh, we got the land, like, whatever. It's just crazy to me. And this theft of the land prompted the Mexicans to retaliate, which led them to stealing from whites, the murders and, the theft included like clothing and gear and stuff like that, but nothing as massive as land. So then we're going to violence. So I understand completely that both parties were very frustrated with each other because in their eyes they could not really see their own issues. Like the white Americans thought they were right, the Mexicans felt like they were, getting beat up from all sides. Like, I don't blame them for feeling the way that they did. So, and I can see why this escalated as much as it did, because from both parties there was just no understanding whatsoever. White Americans were mad at the Mexicans because they felt as though they were entitled to the land that wasn't theirs. And, like, of course, like I mentioned before, the Mexicans wanted to retaliate and defend themselves, their family, their land, that they've taken care of for generations. And according to the chapter Racial Violence and the Texas Rangers in the South Texas borderland, to defend themselves, the Mexicans came together and they started making a little group together to try to kind of gain dominance and come together to defend themselves against the white Americans who were just like, hey, this is my land, like, you guys have to go. Like, can you imagine going to someone's house and putting a for sale sign on their house and being like, oh, you have to go? Not a genuine reason, just out of greed. Like, that would make my blood boil too. So eventually this violence turned into the Mexican quote-unquote rebels, because in history they have the tendency to label black and brown people as rebels and stuff like that. So the Mexicans hung a white shop owner and took all his stuff, whatever. And from there, I feel like things kind of escalated further. Like, they were like 5 steps backwards, but this took 10 steps forward. And then this led to, as mentioned in the documentary Port Veneer, Texas, the Texas Massacre, the slaughtering of multiple men. And honestly, it came down to racial profiling because they assumed that the quote-unquote Mexican rebels who had killed the white shop owner were somehow tied in and hiding Chico, the Mexican rebel. Like, they somehow thought that he was in there and that they were hiding him, which was just racial profiling and just racism. And they killed all those innocent people in front of their families, and they really didn't get any repercussions for it, and they even tried to erase history, which is nothing new for the United States. So impunity, which this ties into what I mentioned with violence. White Americans during this time, they understood that they could get away with anything, and they had that privilege, the status. The Jim Crow is an example of this. Also, the racism that many Mexicans face. They were denied entry places, denied human rights, and this was even seen in the movie Giant, which I think was it was so ahead of its time that it was honestly shocking to see how progressive it was. But just how, like, even in the movie, like, you're making a movie to raise awareness against racism, yet you are plastering dark makeup on an already, Latina actress. Like, that's crazy to me, and that just shows how things like that were okay, even when they were necessarily supposed to be positive. It still had a negative effect. Um, and as mentioned in the chapter, racial violence in Texas Rangers and South Texas borderland, the Mexicans in court, they couldn't even really defend themselves. There's a language barrier. The juries don't look like them. Half of these people who came to the West, I doubt they even seen a Mexican before. So why would they even want to try to, speak the language and try to come to an agreement with them? No, that's just not going to work. So they knew that. Law enforcement was involved, and it was just terrible, and it just shows privilege, and this has happened so much in the history of the United States. So all of the themes are based on each other. I feel like they all mesh perfectly together. The violence, the theft were based on all the injustices that were occurring. Impunity also ties into the Jim Crow laws, because these laws were put into place with no consequences for the oppressors at all. And finally, sorry I'm running out of time, it was fascinating to learn about all this, because it really changed my perspective on the narrative of the Wild West. Like, when I remember my childhood, the Wild West, like, the cowboys were like, oh, like, they're the good guys, like, they stop crime. But, like, after learning all this, I'm like, wait a minute, like, this is a cover-up for all the shady stuff that they were doing behind the scenes, and it completely changes my whole perspective on the quote-unquote wild west. Like, I'm so shocked. Anyways, thank you for listening.